Hey everyone, CWD Reviews here. I'm CWD, and this is going to be a review of the new Megadeth album, Dystopia. Megadeth, if you're not in the know, is a long-running thrash metal project fronted by singer-songwriter, guitar virtuoso Dave Mustaine. Dave was a founding member of the band Metallica, and unfortunately he was kicked out before they dropped their debut album, Kill 'Em All. So a couple of years later, he dropped his own debut album as the band Megadeth. Killing is my business and business is good. I can't say that Megadeth has been a band that I've been interested in. The other members of the Big Four, namely Metallica and Slayer, have gripped my interest in the genre of thrash metal, doing music that I personally think is quite fantastic. Metallica mainly so. Megadeth are certainly a formidable metal group. They're certainly influential. Dave's still a great guitar player. Plus I got Chris Adler of Lamb of God fame on drums. So I thought to myself, hey, what's the worst that could happen? Well, as it turns out, everything. You essentially get an idea of what this album is going to sound like when you hear the opening track. The threat is real. You get these really dated metal riffs and really dated production. Not that these riffs are bad or performed horribly, it's just that the riffs, they sound like they could have came out in the 90s or maybe even the 80s. They're not even making an attempt to make this sound fresh for now. It just doesn't seem a plausible option, honestly. And that's the thing. While these riffs are okay to somewhat decent, you don't sign on to listening to an album from one of the most influential metal bands to come out of music to get some just alright riffs. You just don't. This pretty much variates with maybe some transitions or some like other stuff. The track Post-American World actually has like this post-industrial instrumental that adds nothing to the project. It's grating to even think about. It's like Megadeth. You need to create as much variety as possible out of obligation instead of just some cool ideas. They're not doing that. The only track that I liked is Conquer or Die. Well, again, it's not doing anything like new or fresh or even that great. It cuts itself off of what I think is the worst things about this album. The vocals and the lyrics. Now, Mustaine, he's never technically been like this super technical singer or anything like that. His voice has not aged all that well. He sounds like grating, middle-aged man vocals that really don't do much for the project. And the only track that his vocals works on is Poisonous Shadows, which he sounds really melancholy. I think it's pretty cool. It fits like the tone of the song, even if the lyrics here still remain really cringeworthy. But for the most part, you're getting these overly dramatic middle-aged man vocals on every single song on the album. But what is Mustaine saying? He's not saying anything that's compelling or even good. Pretty much every single track on this album has this sci-fi dystopian theme, this really unoriginal idea that Western civilization is going to one day collapse, and what's going to come after that is this sort of dystopia. Mustaine's not doing anything that's really original or compelling with like this dated idea. The track Bullet to the Brain actually has this dialogue between this woman and this man, the man sexually abusing her, and she eventually gets her revenge and putting a bullet through his head. It just sounds so cringeworthy. Tongue in her lip, penetrating deeper. It's just laughable how he's going off on this. It's just no. And there's the track Lying in State, where he's talking about how these government cover-ups, these big government cover-ups, are going to ruin the American society. History is going to look at us as pathetic, and blah 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 blah. And there's like a line where he says, the perfect words conceal the greatest crimes. And it's funny you talk about perfect words when throughout this entire album, Mustaine has been unable to conceive of even remotely good ones. And I think the last straw was, fortunately enough, the closing track where he says, and I shit you not, he says, "You're bad for my health in that you make me sick." these observations Mustaine are making about dystopian society aren't at all compelling. This is like lyricism specifically meant to be listened to by children. It's unfortunate that Megadeth have fallen so far, that what they are able to conceive is nothing greater than the sonic equivalent to a Michael Bay movie. I can actually think of like several comparisons, several similes to describe this album as. This album sounds like what would have happened if Muse's drones took a turn for the absolute worst. This album sounds like if Donald Trump was allowed to make music. This album sounds like if your paranoid conspiracy theorist cousin or friend somehow was able to learn how to play guitar, able to trust the commercialized world enough to go out and buy a fucking guitar and try to make music. This album is just completely awful. Aside from like maybe the performances, and Mustaine can still noodle solo really well, there's just absolutely nothing redeeming about this album. What doesn't make sense to me is you are a well-renowned thrash metal band. Why would you make an album that's gonna sully your discography? So yeah, overall, this album isn't great. It's not even good, for that matter. It just... The more I look at the big four of thrash metal, as of right now, the legacy that they are leaving behind and trying to build on, the more Megadeth seem to be my least favorite of all four of them. So this album is a negative 2.2 out of +3. Did not like this album at all. I can't even recommend this to Megadeth fans unless they're just super into the band. If you're super into Megadeth, pursue this album at your own risk. But if you're just one of those skeptical Megadeth fans or whatever, or one of those skeptical metal fans, then don't even bother listening to this album. But if you did listen to this album, kudos to you, by the way. What did you think of it? Did you like this album? Did you dislike this album? Why? And what should I consider listening to and reviewing next? This is CDD Reviews here, signing off.